Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Brian Lima, cardiac surgeon and best-selling author of an inspirational autobiography that we're going to talk about called Heart to Beat. He was awarded the 2020 Doctor of the Year, and Dr. Lima is a global authority on advanced heart failure, heart transplants, and medical circulatory devices. Pretty heavy stuff. And he serves now as the surgical director of heart transplant and circulatory support at the Medical City Heart Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Big deal place we'll talk about. Welcome, Brian. It's good to see you again, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. You look like you're kind of in the scrubs, ready to go. You guys, have you had a busy season here going into 2022?
Pretty busy. Had an emergency heart surgery last night to do, so kind of running around, seeing everybody. A lot of sick folks in the hospital,
I bet.
And some surgeries coming up.
Yeah, when I first met you about a year ago, we had to postpone this, and first time because you had to go save someone's life, and I think the second time it was my fault. But when I met you, I was really struck by your childhood story about how quite frankly you were inspired by your father's heart attack, which usually people don't get inspired around. But I think you were like 10 years old, right?
Right.
Is that when you decided to become a heart surgeon? I mean, it's kind of young.
Well, it got me interested in medicine, the idea of medicine, because it was so intimidating. How helpless we all felt, that fear. So it definitely got me on the track to want to become a physician. And then as I got into it and experienced and actually got to watch different kinds of medicine, experience different kinds of medicine,
Right.
surgery was love at first sight, and it was just a natural fit. It just seemed to click. I couldn't think of myself doing anything else. So
you picked like one of the hardest things in the world. I know everyone's asked you this question before, but which is harder, brain surgery or heart surgery?
Oh yeah, no, the brain is not a moving target. The heart is.
I know, but everybody always says. I was over at this club the other day, and the guy goes, "Steve, we're not like doing brain surgery here." I'm like, "Well, actually, heart surgery is harder. I've heard."
Right. I like to joke around about that. Obviously, brain surgeons, neurosurgeons are fantastic and so skilled.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Heart surgery, really, I mean, I think it's more high risk in the sense that you really could, the risk of death is at every step.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, you have a moving target and things like that. So of course I'm biased, but I would have to say I think heart surgery is the hardest field to navigate through and be really exceptionally competent at it as well. So
yeah, you've proven that. We'll get into some of those stats in a minute. Talk about health and wellness too, but maybe just start at when I first met you. I took a look at the book. So Heart to Beat. What's the takeaway from that? It's an autobiography. It's doing incredibly well, bestseller, I think, on the Wall Street Journal list, and maybe a couple of others, right?
Well, I mean, takeaway, I like to call it, it's like a motivational manifesto written through my life story. And it's basically how I was able to slowly but surely get to where I wanted to get to professionally, educationally, academically. And statistically, if you would have tried to predict that trajectory, it was very unlikely. And it was just something I had to outwork everybody at every step of the way. And I think the main theme of the book is that through hard work, dedication,
Mm-hmm.
it really doesn't matter what, natural talent you lack, you can make up for a lot of that with just sheer effort and perseverance. And I think that's what my life really is a testament to, my life story, how far I've been able to come. And so that's really the main thematic idea of the book.
So were you kind of the underdog when you were younger?
I felt like it. I felt like it at every step. I always felt like I was undergunned. I
Hmm.
was not those. I never felt like I was the smartest kid in any of my classes in school, in college, med school. I felt like I always had probably a lower IQ relative to what I would, what I thought of as really geniuses with photographic memories in many instances. And so I really had to just work twice or three times as hard, spend as much, much longer periods of time to absorb the information, master the information. So I definitely felt like I was the underdog.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you get through med school? I mean, that's like no easy.
A
we're
lot
not
of
told.
it is a blur, to be honest. I
I,
felt
I bet.
just really the sheer volume of information that we were expected to memorize and apply.
Hmm.
I had to just basically revamp my whole methodology for studying and almost, I mean, as you say, you've probably read in the book, I attacked the whole concept of being well-rounded. I certainly was not well-rounded at that time. Nowhere close. I was completely, fully immersed in
Yeah.
that environment and I had to. There's really no other way I would have been able to do it.
That I like that part about the book. Well, because you struck me as someone I first talked to who's not just well-rounded, but you're definitely driven, but you're also very practical. I have a lot of the same issues with. I think one famous quote is a lot of these smarties, they do have a photographic memory. Some of us just don't have film in the camera, and so kind of learning that
Right.
whole connective tissue and the muscle memory of becoming a heart surgeon. I had the muscle memory to become a serial CEO and have maybe done that, I don't know, under 20 times is maybe 18.
Wow.
You're doing that. No, it's actually not wow. It's like, to me, what you do is like, wow. It's like
Yeah.
living, breathing, taking someone into, just someone's life into your hands. Not to mention, something's coming in on a plane that you may or may not be able to get in time. How do you, I mean, a lot of people want to know, if I could learn how to handle the stress Brian does, I could probably run anything, company, organization, nonprofit, whatever. I wouldn't stress out so much. So you talk about that in the book a little bit,
I
advice on.
do. I talk about how there's really no easy formula for this is what you need to do
Mm,
to master stress or overcome, major disappointments. Because, if I have a bad day at work, that meant someone died, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, and so it's one of those things where you really have to get disciplined about not allowing the negative self-talk to just totally take over and to the point where you lose your confidence. You have to have confidence. You can never lose that. You try to extract whatever any morsel of uh, a lesson or what could you have done better. You go through that exercise. You obviously are remorseful and regretful, but
Mhm.
I think so long as you do your best, do everything in your power to make sure you've done everything, you've left no stone unturned. I think at the end of the day, you can't really beat yourself up too much. You have to give yourself that pat on the back, say, hey, you did what you could, you did everything you could, and now you have to move on because being stationary is that's not an option. And that's definitely one thing I harp on in the book a lot. And it's the whole concept of and philosophy of the heart way. The heart just keeps going, and just like that, you have to keep going. Staying stationary and spinning your wheels and reliving that terrible moment and perseverating over it, that's not going to solve anything. You have to keep moving forward.
And many of the people listening and do that. I mean, I teach my Kellogg students, again, MBA students, a little different from medical students, but some of them are also engineering double majors. So it's interesting. And they're older, so they're almost 30, right? But I often teach them the power of and. You can't just, so I love your can't be stationary. For me, the lesson is, this one lecture I do on purpose, which has nothing to do with innovation and entrepreneurship, is which we're teaching, but like, you can't find your purpose from someone else. You've got to constantly come up with it pretty much every month, every week, every day, and it is shifting. So my trick there is the power of and. You can do your corporate job, but you also should probably be volunteering in entrepreneurial circles, or you can do your medical stuff, but you also maybe should look into engineering. You've got to do one or two or three things at once so early in your career that you get enough tasting and sampling. With med students, can't do that. It's just like myopic focus. I mean, how did you even, I made fun of how'd you get through school, but it's like, you went through school and residency and fellowship. And were there times where you did doubt yourself? Is that where these lessons are coming from? And how did you work through that? Any lessons learned there?
Oh yeah, I mean there are probably innumerable instances when I doubted myself, just because each transition that you make, you think you're a pretty good, big deal. You graduated from a top medical school, and then all of a sudden you realize you're on rung number one of 10 rungs that you have to navigate upwards through.
I just got a horrible visual with that, by the way. Yes,
And
I
so
feel that.
yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like, imagine yourself how you were in first grade, and then you have the 10th grader, coming that all of that.
Beating you up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it felt like. And I just
boy.
kind of had to constantly tell myself, look, if these guys could do it, so could I. So that was one tactic that I would have, just always going back to that, saying, this is part of the process. I've done this kind of thing before, meaning mastered things that were seemingly unapproachable, complicated, but it's a process. Everyone has to go through it. And so that's how I would try to cope with that, and not let it get, to my head too much,
Yeah.
not overthink it, and take your licks along the way, which that's the unavoidable part. You really do have to have thick skin.
Yeah.
You can't take it personal. It's a learning process. So that's literally inching my way step by step. That's how I did it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of I mean, you're on here not just talk about medical stuff, because there's
Right.
a lot of transference to that. And I was just telling the audience that, but there's so much transference of what you're saying into business leadership, into startups and entrepreneurship, and just running anything that isn't told from a perspective of what you've gone through. It's usually told from a perspective of business people like me, and they look at the books and they go, okay, I've kind of heard this 10 times already, but there's always like one little nugget in there that's different, where this one, the whole thing's different. So I think it's great advice for entrepreneurs, business leaders, civic leaders, quite frankly. But what else they might like to know is, they often come to me and ask me, I want to write a book. And I say, well, good thing to just get a couple page proposal going to see if it's really something that resonates with anybody. And they're like, oh, I'm too busy. I'm like, oh boy, you don't know what busy is. Look at Brian's life. So how did you actually find the time to, because you were already working when you wrote this. This isn't that old. You were probably doing 3 jobs at that time. How'd you pull it off?
Well, it was a culmination of years, really, of just accumulating notes, things that would come to me, and reading a lot. I read a lot of other books and kind of got a sense for, hey, what's already been touched on, what's missing, what's really not out there yet, what's the message that I want to get across, what's the story that I want to tell. And it wasn't until I really had a good understanding of where my story could fit that I felt then compelled to finally, get some momentum, undo that inertia and really take that first step towards writing. And I think getting an organizational outline of what it is you want to, convey, like you said, a book proposal is a good place to start, because that forces you to do all those things. You kind of have to have a good command of what others, in the subject matter that you're thinking about writing about, what's out there already. Where does your potential story fit, or your contribution fit? And then once you have that and you have an outline, then it's fleshing it out. And I think that is just being disciplined about step by step. I would write a little bit every day. And once I had the outline, it literally was something I wrote it over around 4 months. But it was a lot of work during those 4 months. But it was, you kind of get that momentum going, and you just go, you find time, an hour here, an hour there, weekends, off hours.
Yeah, and you get pulled into a lot of emergencies that most of us don't get pulled into, or if we do, we say, "Hey, can we do this on Sunday?" And you don't have you don't have the option to ask that question.
Exactly.
No, it's good advice for also just starting a company, writing a business plan, whatever, just anything. Just put a little thought into it, organize your thoughts, and then I usually tell people hit the print button and set it on the table and read it tomorrow before you send that thing to anybody.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about book proposals, just anything. And
Yes.
so I often do that myself, and I read it the next day and I'm like, oh my God, what was I'm so glad I didn't send that. I'm so much further along now in my thought process. It's only been 20 hours.
Right.
You know, it's so, you know, for patients that have heart attacks or worse need a transplant, it's usually when they see you, it seems to be a real wake up call to reboot their lives. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. Any compelling stories there where you've, I assume you've stayed in touch with it. If you put a new heart in me, I would stay in touch with you. So my guess is, I don't mean medically, I meant personally, because you saved my life. So what's that like?
There's nothing like it, really. I mean, it's such a roller coaster ride, extremes of emotion. You know, you have, and invariably, in many of these instances, these patients, and I have these conversations literally almost every week, where they're coming in and they're very, very sick, and often this was sort of totally out of the blue. And it's always like, we don't understand how this could happen. We didn't do X, we didn't do Y, we didn't smoke, or he didn't do this, or how could this have not been discovered before?
Wow.
And that's unfortunately the crux of it, right? Is that this isn't something that's going to just, like alarm bells signal that it's there. Often, like cancer, it's one of those things that can sneak up. And so the onus is on us to promote prevention, wellness. How do you prevent things like this from happening? So these encounters are often in these scenarios where there's a lot of denial and just disbelief and despair, because no one ever saw it coming. And so, and I've been there, right? As a kid,
Sure.
it brings me always back to that.
10 years old. Yeah.
And so,
Was your dad a smoker?
He wasn't a smoker, but I'm of Cuban descent. He was Cuban, and Cuban cuisine classically is definitely not heart healthy.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. I'm Italian. My dad was a big guy. Yeah. But
Right.
but before we go to the health and wellness part, what about some of the after stories? Where they reach out to you after you've saved them, quite frankly.
Well, we've of late had a few incredible success stories that we decided to actually convert into promotional testimonials.
Oh boy. Yeah.
One is of a young patient, literally in his late 30s,
Yeah.
massive heart attack, totally out of the blue, with kids, young kids, and had to have an emergency heart surgery. And unfortunately, his heart was so sick that even that was not successful. Just getting, blood flow back to the heart. The heart was already too damaged.
Right.
And so our team had to step in and put this poor guy on temporary life support, basically like a portable heart lung machine. And we were eventually, able to get him transplanted within, I think, a week of all of this.
Wow.
So he comes into the hospital, never having really any issues, major heart attack, heart surgery, and then a week or two later, he's got a new heart. But he's able to go back home and be with his family. And so that really, when you have little kids that were almost rendered fatherless, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That, and you were able to help prevent that and reunite the family and get them back on track, right? And that's, one of the most emotional things, right? Because sure, there's saving that individual patient, but when you have such a huge impact on a whole family and the future of that family and raising children,
that's remarkable.
Strikes a chord, of course, right? So
a lot of ups and downs, and you've had a lot of ups and downs in your life. I think you share some of them in the book. What's been your hardest thing to overcome?
I think the two hardest things were, number one, having how to navigate, being on this, myopic, as you said, single-minded focus mission to
Sorry, I
achieve
could have used a better word, but
I love
yeah.
it. No, but you're on this mission. Okay, this is the goal. I'm going after it. You know, you're hell bent on this goal, and then oh wait, but how do I balance friends and family along the way with that? That's been really tough. That's been really tough. It goes back to the how I don't think you can really be well-rounded realistically. You can't be successful, in my opinion, in all aspects of your life at the same time.
Yeah, the whole concept of work-life balance has been
Right.
thrown out the door,
That
especially with COVID. It's gotten worse.
Yeah, that to me has been and continues to be, I would say, the biggest challenge is how do you balance all of that? How do you, because my job in particular, right, it's not a clock in, clock out. I can't say, hey, it's 5 p.m. I know I just did your big heart surgery, but I got to go. And
Yeah.
so it's tough. How do you not bring that home? How do you not let it affect you?
That's got to be tough on a marriage and a family.
Right. So that's an ongoing thing. I think with as I've gotten older, I've managed to do better and better with that, but it's not easy. It's something you have to work at, and it never stops, right? It's because it's very episodic, very seasonal. Sometimes things aren't too busy, and sometimes things get pretty hectic. So you have to be able to pivot a lot in your personal life to accommodate the work life.
Yeah, those of you that can't see the video because you're just listening on one of the podcast channels, I'm nodding my head a lot here because I went through a similar thing, when we're young and dumb and just trying to conquer the world, and you kind of let things slip in terms of what's really important in your life. And I do talk to students about that. Most of them are still single, and I'm like, don't wait till you get married to learn this skill, because that is when I should have learned it before.
Right.
And as you get older, I don't know, in your job, you can't do this, but as you get older, it's like, you just have to figure, I don't give a hoot about certain things, and you have to let things go. So you do focus more on the important ones, but not if you're going to get a call at midnight that you have to come in and do, heart surgery.
Right.
It's totally different than, a CEO or a VP or a manager that's just starting out, going up what'd you say, ring one on the ladder.
Right.
It's
10 or 100, right?
That is hard enough. So those are good lessons. You've talked a little bit around it. Let's just jump into it. So everyone wants to know whenever they're talking to a doctor, like, what should I do? And then the doctor tells them, and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then they just go home. They don't do it. I think I'm talking about myself. So love to hear, Revive, our sponsor, is, health, beauty, and wellness diagnostics for people by taking a selfie, giving diagnostics AI information about mostly things that go on in their body, like skincare and makeup. But that industry is quickly moving into what you put inside your body is more important than what you're putting on it, unless it's a medical type of cream that you're putting on it. So I'm watching this whole health and wellness trend, bringing in food, bringing in medicine, food as medicine, all these different things that we're working on in the different ecosystems I run into. But then I always sit back and ask a doctor, what should we be doing? Not just for heart attacks, but really with ourselves, with our bodies. What's your take these days?
Well, I always refer back to what I regard, I think, is the most useful and simplest, easy to follow set of guidelines that the American Heart Association puts out, and it's Life Simple 7.
And I'm writing this down. Go ahead.
And there's 7 things that really all of us could do. It's not a foolproof plan of avoiding heart disease, but it mitigates the risk. And it includes things like, number 1, not smoking of any kind. Exercising regularly.
So even the recreational marijuana guys need to wake up a little bit, is what you're saying.
I would say so, yes.
Seriously, okay.
The idea of exercising, it's not just, it's literally moderate levels of exercise 3 to 4 times a week. Okay. And that ties into, having a healthy weight, not being obese, making sure your blood sugars are in check, your blood pressure is in check, your cholesterol is in check. Those 3 things really can't happen unless you're seeing a doctor. You have to see a physician or be seeing your annual checkup so that you know about these things. If you don't measure it, you don't know, right? And when you measure things, you improve them.
Wait a minute,
So
is doctor number 4? or is that
Yeah,
part
it's
of the
one of.
process?
So these aren't really any particular order.
No, it's fine. Can I just stop you there though? Because
Yeah.
most of us, what's happened to the general checkup in this country is you go in once a year and they barely do anything anymore. It's all in the blood work. So,
Well, some of it is blood work, but getting that blood pressure check, and then if
yeah,
things
I
aren't,
guess my point is once a year isn't enough. Maybe that's the better point.
probably not, especially if things are not where they need to be.
Gotcha.
That thing that can accumulate over time. But those are really the main. Obviously, it all ties into diet too. A heart healthy diet, which basically means low fat, low salt, portion control, things like that. It's not a one size fits all. There's a lot of variability there that could take on different versions, but the general guiding principles are that. It's hard to do all of these things, of course, right, at the same time, but it's important. These are things that can insidiously, over time, come together as like this perfect storm, right, and wreak havoc. And so, these are things though that we can all do. There's nothing out of the ordinary that most people out there could do.
And you usually just hear about the diet and exercise, and people nod their heads and they, swing by McDonald's on their way home.
Right.
Not a sponsor of the program, so I can say that. Anything else though that you've learned? I mean, you've mentioned stress a few times, and I'm probably terrible at managing it. I think I could say that out loud.
Yeah, I mean, that's health and wellness, right? And I think
exactly.
mental well-being ties into our overall physical well-being. And so, getting enough sleep, whether it's meditating or other measures that you could take to mitigate stress. We all have stress in our lives, and I think modern society, is more stressful. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but the idea that we live in the age of stress, of fear. We're always on the clock. We have our phones. We're always looking at our phones. We can be contacted 24/7, right? There's no escape. We live in a pretty hectic time.
I call it I call it the Moore's law effect. We're slaves to Moore's law and these devices. Which is an email I sent to you this morning. And I think technologically that's going to change. I think these devices are going to start doing more things for us and de-stressing, but we're still at that point where we're inventing this industry, right, and all it's done is made everyone busier and more distracted. I mean, probably the only time you're turned off is when you're actually in the operating room. Whereas me, I can be in a board meeting, I can be in a room, I can be doing all the normal things that I would be doing, and I'm still looking at 3 screens.
That's right.
It's like, it's too much, and the kids are doing it more and more. So it's interesting to think the next generation will just, since they grew up with it, they'll just be like, I'm not stressed. This is fine. This is normal.
Well, quite the contrary. Actually, there's data to suggest that for the first time ever in history, for example, if you look at millennials and you look at Generation X, millennials have worse heart health than Generation X.
Wow.
A lot of factors to that, but that's the first time you could say in our modern history that the the younger generation relative to the older generation at the same age is less healthy.
And is that because we're sitting around playing games and just playing with our phones and not out playing and moving?
Pretty much. That's definitely a huge component to it.
Like you said, stationary is not an option.
Right. Or everyone thinking, well, why do I need to go see a physician? I have Google. I could look online. Right. I know what's wrong. I don't,
for $69, you can get the portable EKG. This used to be like, they used to be with your fingers. Do those work?
They serve a role. I think maybe not quite ready for prime time, but they're better than nothing. How's that? I think they're better than. So I endorse it in that regard for sure.
That's actually an interesting comparable. Juan, our producer, is probably thinking it's like Revive is actually, you take a selfie and it does a basic analysis of your skin. It's like level 1. There's also medical devices that go level 2 and 3, and it's kind of similar. So in some cases, that's why I brought up the EKG thing, because I know the founders that started that years ago. It was very expensive then. But it is, at least it's an awareness tool, right? That
Sure.
they would call you and come in, maybe. Yeah. I really want to thank you for being on. We always run out of time with fascinating folks like you. Real specific for the med students that we're going to be reading this or listening to it, high school students. Any advice about, I think we need more doctors in this country that grew up in this country, that it doesn't seem to be as an attractive field as it used to be. Maybe specialists just make a lot more money. I don't know what it takes. I don't know what the reasons are, but any advice you'd give to people who were inspired, like, I want to go into med, to actually make that step?
I think there's hard to argue there's a more rewarding field that exists in humanity than the field of medicine, where you can actually use your gifts, your training to help save lives. And it's not about money. If it becomes about, well, what's a good salary, this, that, it can't be about that, because that won't get you through. That's not why I did what I do. It's got to be this sort of fundamental drive to want to help people in the most important way, and that is to basically at their worst be there to help them through it. And I think if there's an inkling of that in you, then you have to go for it. And nothing else matters. You can't worry about a lot of naysayers that poo-poo this whole field of medicine now, and it's taken a lot of flack, but I still think, without question, the most rewarding field on the planet.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. You've been listening to Dr. Brian Lima, and he has joined us on the Reboot Chronicles. This is Dean Tobias. Glad that you joined us, and we'll see you soon.